Hi, Nation of Allies. We're so excited that you've joined us tonight for the Caregiver Breakout Session. I have a very special guest joining us, and I can't wait for you to get to know her a little bit better. We're going to have an informal conversation together about mental health and self-care as it pertains to caregivers. So sit back and relax, and we think that you're going to have a time where you'll be able to think really, deeply about your own experience and maybe come away from this session with some tools and some tricks and ways to improve both your mental health and your self-care. So we're going to start with some introductions. My name, like I said, is Danielle Peterson. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and have been working with families affected by cancer for the last several years. And I have been honored to meet many people who have been diagnosed, in all different stages of the diagnosis, some 10, 20, 30 years post-diagnosis. I've worked with people of all ages and people with all different types of cancers. Most recently, I have had the honor of working for the Colorectal Cancer Alliance as a patient navigator. And so I have learned very intimately about the challenges that people facing colorectal cancer experience. And so most recently, I've taken a job to teach social work full time. So I've stepped out of this realm a little bit, but still very much love to talk about my favorite topic, which is mental health for both the person who's experiencing cancer and their caregiver. And today, like I said, I have a very special guest with us. So Sarah, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Danielle. So I'm Sarah Perlman, and this has been a journey to get to this point. So a little background on me. I work in television. I have probably a normal life like most of us. And back in March, my boyfriend, Trey Mancini, who plays for the Baltimore Orioles, was diagnosed with colon cancer. He was 28, so certainly it was a whirlwind. I'm 26 years old. So from there, I've really gotten to know the colorectal, cancer family and a lot of people that have helped me. So here, I'm really happy to be here and speak about caregiving and in particular, my journey along with Trey's over these last few months.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about yourself, what it's been like for you since Trey was diagnosed. And I'm excited to dig in with you and again, get to know you and your story a little bit more. So I always like to start these conversations with research because I think that it gives us a good foundation to jump off of. I think it's just also important that we recognize that caregiving is a serious business. So research actually tells us that caregivers are affected negatively by caregiving sometimes. This can look like them being more prone to depression, anxiety, and even poor physical health. So it's not just emotional health that we sometimes get concerned about for caregivers, but it can be their physical health as well. And this makes sense because as caregivers, the research also tells us that they are adding more than 20 hours a week of caregiving experience to their already full plates. So as I like to say, there's no fairy godmother that comes and sprinkles extra time on the plates of caregivers. No, they're still trying to manage all of the other issues and stresses of normal daily life. And then cancer comes just barging in. So it makes sense, right? Like that caregivers struggle to take care of themselves. And because of that, they can have worse outcomes than people who aren't in the caregiving role. And, they're not always the best at taking care of themselves. And we're going to talk a little bit more about why that might be. I think one of the other aspects of research that I really want to, tell our listeners today is that we're learning that not only does caregiving affect the caregiver themselves, but can actually have a trickle-down effect to their loved one or the patient who's experiencing cancer. So whether or not it's because the caregiver isn't taking the best care of themselves or just the loved one feeling stressed out about what's happening with their caregiver, in some cases, the person who's experiencing cancer is being affected by the caregiver's well-being or lack thereof. So if Sarah and I can't convince you by the end of the night to take care of yourself for yourself, then maybe start to do it for your loved one. Sarah, what have your days looked like since you've become a caregiver?
So it was a really wild time for Trey and I, because I mentioned our schedules leading up to the diagnosis were wild. And I think a lot of people will understand whenever the diagnosis is given, your world does take a turn no matter what, right? So ours was a little rough strictly because we never thought that he'd be diagnosed with cancer like a lot of people. And there's a bad stigma, I would say, or a false stigma rather, that, colon cancer in particular occurs with men and older men. And then since Trey was 28, our world just took such a whirlwind because doctors really said that's not a possibility leading up to it. And I'll get more into that later. But for me, Trey just finished chemotherapy last month. So the 6 months of chemotherapy were really tricky. He finished surgery. And I think that the biggest thing for me was just learning how to be a nurse. And that sounds really crazy, but I have no background in medicine whatsoever. And I haven't spent much time in hospitals, especially to this extent. So the shock was there, but then also, like I mentioned, learning how to care for someone from a medicinal standpoint, right? And the fact that I needed to flush his port after every single treatment and not be weirded out by taking a needle out and making sure it's in this, biohazard tub and putting on gloves and wearing a mask and, using hand sanitizer and keeping our apartment clean. It was such a crazy whirlwind. So that was the first thing. And after learning how to be a nurse, things just kept changing. So not only are you taking out medicine and flushing the port and cleaning, you're helping with a lot of other things. For instance, helping your significant other shower, take a bath, because a lot of the times if the person you were taking care of, maybe not your significant other, isn't on pills, they're a little bit hindered when they're getting treatment because, for example, Trey had treatment on Monday and we'd flush it Wednesday later in the day. And at that point, from Monday to Wednesday, he could not take a shower because the port could not get wet. And for me, giving a bath to my significant other was something I had to learn. And especially because you're really careful because you don't want to hurt him. You do not want to be frustrated when you're trying to help someone. And also you want to be gentle. There's a lot of things connected. And like I said, I wasn't in the medical field. So that was really tricky for me, just learning how to draw a bath and not get this wet and help him get out of the shower and help him put clothes on when he doesn't feel good. And that to me was one of the trickier parts because it went from being my significant other to a typical 20-something-year-old life to, okay, let's get your medicine out. Let's make sure we have Pedialyte. Let's make sure the water temperature is okay. And that felt overwhelming at times. But I do think it is crazy how much you can handle. And mental health is a big part of that, I think. Just being able to go day to day and go with the flow and learn how to do things. So those are the trickiest things for me. And now I look back and I think, wow, we did it. And I feel very accomplished. And during it, there were tricky times, but it's also, I think, just such an important thing to be there mentally and in a good space to help whoever you're caregiving for.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are some excellent examples, and I think really common examples of what many caregivers have faced. It was interesting when you said, I had to get Pedialyte and test the water temperature of a bath. I mean, these are things that you usually think of when it comes to mothering, not when it comes to being someone's girlfriend, right? So we see caregivers often have to change roles. Instead of being the partner or the maybe even the lover, you're becoming the nurse. And many of us chose not to go into nursing on purpose because we didn't want to have to deal with things that maybe were uncomfortable to us. Some of the nurses who are watching today are maybe laughing at us, but it's hard. It's really hard. So I just think that what you're talking about is so normal. And these things that we often take for granted, like being able to shower, being able to eat, being able to sleep normally, these are things that are really difficult to watch our loved ones struggle with. It's devastating, to say the least. So, especially because there are times when you're just sick of it and want to go back to the way that it used to be. So since you've had all of these practical tasks thrown in your lap, what are some of the emotions? I know you touched on them a bit there, but what are some of those emotions that you've experienced since Trey's been diagnosed?
There were so many emotions, especially at the beginning. And Danielle, I know you and I have talked over the last few weeks, and it's amazing the work you do, because for me, the shock value, I think, was the number one thing. And for someone that's not in the medical field or not in social work and working with any illness, it was shocking because it seemed like something that cannot happen to someone you know, let alone someone you love. So for me, after getting over, oh my gosh, this is real and he's in surgery and we're waiting for phone calls about what will the chemotherapy look like? What will the next year look like? After the shock settled in and the day-to-day started to happen, it became a lot easier. I will say it was really challenging at times. And I think recognizing that it's challenging, but also recognizing that you can do it and you can be helpful and you can be the best version of yourself at times. And there's going to be tough times. That's also helpful to know, because there were times where it felt like an uphill mountain. It was a battle just getting through the days of realizing, wow, 11 treatments left, 10 treatments left. Watching someone else get sick is difficult. And I was not prepared for that. And that was truly the toughest part, because whenever you watch someone that you love and they're sick and not feeling well, you want to take that from them so badly. So I mentioned getting Pedialyte. And that was really some of the examples I use, in fact, of trying to make the best and trying to do what you can to help. So Pedialyte, right? Like preparing with hydration and learning as you go. We didn't know what foods Trey was going to hate. We didn't know what foods he was going to like, when he was going to be hungry, if he was going to be hungry. And at some days we knew he was not eating and he was going to lose a lot of weight, because he's a big guy, he's an athlete. So he drops weight like that and he could put it on quicker. But it took a long time to realize at what point do we need to start, making protein shakes and trying different things. And for him, one of the main things was cold sensitivity with one of the drugs he was on, oxaliplatin. And so me heating up water just to have him drink water, stuff like that became emotionally exhausting, because I kept thinking, what can he have? When can he have it? But it was something that once I learned, and as the treatments went by, I felt myself becoming more confident as a caregiver, because I knew things that worked and knew things that possibly didn't work or thought weren't worth a try. And I think the learning curve is huge, but the process of it does become better as you become more confident, both as yourself as a caregiver. And like I said, and I keep reiterating, kind of learning what works in whichever relationship you have with the person dealing with cancer, and also just becoming, kind of like a mock nurse, and then rolling with the punches and really giving it your best at that time.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've allowed yourself to just kind of go through a journey and to have times of self-doubt and insecurity, being unsure with yourself, but it doesn't sound like that stopped you. And in fact, it sounds like it almost kind of challenged you, and you allowed yourself to say, this isn't quite where I want it to be yet, but we're going to keep working at it. We're going to learn. We're going to ask questions. We're not going to give up. We're going to just put one foot in front of the other. And I think that that's a testament to this positive mindset, Sarah, that I know that is really important to you. And when we have talked in the past, you've mentioned that, without that positive mindset, you're not quite sure where you'd be at this time. So I'd love for you to tell the viewers a little bit more about what it means to have a positive mindset for yourself. And, was that something that you've always had, or did you have to choose that once Trey was diagnosed, or what was kind of the process of that for you?
Right, Danielle. So I'm a really positive person. I'd be lying to all of you if I said this positivity is fake or masked or came out of nowhere. I've always been positive, and that is my personality. That being said, I've really worked on it throughout this journey, because to your point, Danielle, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, just saying, you've just allowed yourself to go on this journey, because there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And whether that's living with cancer, becoming cancer free in a sense, whatever it is, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that's a very important distinction, because your life will be altered. Yes, but it will get better in the sense of, kind of like I said, learning how to deal with what you're going through. And that's where mental health plays a role. That's where my positivity was the number one thing. I get that question all the time. How did you stay so sane or positive, or what was it like? I believe there is no choice but to be positive in a situation like getting a cancer diagnosis. And that's something I feel really helped me along the way. I think it's whatever your religion is or no religion, there needs to be just a light inside you saying, we are going to get through this, because I think the more you can tell yourself that and write or read, and I know we're going to talk about self-affirmation, all that stuff is so crucial, because it's hard being a caregiver and it's hard taking care of someone. And it's especially hard if you're like me and had no background in the medical field. But I think looking and thinking, okay, whatever's going to happen, I know we're going to get through it, whichever way. That's what helped me through some of the hardest months of my life. And I'm not being dramatic when I say it was the most difficult 6 to 8 months of my livelihood. So I think it gets easier, and that's the best way to put it. It gets easier. You learn more. Whoever has cancer will learn more about their diagnosis and then what will happen from there. And I just can't say enough that it's okay to be hard on yourself, but also give yourself credit, because I know you're doing a darn good job with whatever you're doing. It's difficult, and I know it's possible to get through, and be proud of yourself is my best advice. And I always reminded myself I'm doing the absolute best I could do right now.
Kind of gives me chills when you said that, because Sarah, when we talked about this last time, I asked you, what do you wish a caregiver would have told you, those first months into caregiving? And your answer, if I recall correctly, was, I just wish I would have been told that it was going to get better. So for any of you out there who are thinking this is it, like it's not going to change, this is going to be awful forever. We can't promise that it's going to change to the way that you want it to be. But to Sarah's point, things do change, and you do learn along the way. You'll learn more of the words. You'll learn of the people that you need to, tap in for help. You'll get better at asking for help. You'll find the best places to park at the medical center, the best places to get food. These little things that when you first start, they're just, absolutely brand new. So I just love that you took the opportunity to say that to everyone, because that was something that would have been really valuable to you. So let's transition a bit. What about self-care? I know that we've kind of touched on that a few times now. So what has self-care meant to you?
Well, Danielle, I think it's everything. I think it's arguably one of the most important aspects of being a caregiver. And I know I've touched on it. And I think now's the point that everyone thinking, okay, this has been so difficult. I've dedicated, the past X amount of months, or I'll dedicate the next year to my significant other. You need time for yourself. And that's where I think I was able to find kind of solace and just a lot of peace in my mind, knowing, okay, I'll use Trey as my example because that's how it comes out. But for example, Trey, when he was feeling, kind of and would take a nap, I knew for the next few hours after he'd be up or whatever, I'm going to go for a walk. And this is during COVID times too, in quarantine. So we were really limited, but I knew I needed time for myself, and going for a walk, clearing my mind and not feeling guilty or selfish is huge. You have to not only have the positive mindset and believe in yourself and really know that you are doing the best darn job you could possibly do, but also taking time for yourself. So whether that's reading for quiet time for a few hours, or cooking, or not feeling like you need to be hovering over whoever you're taking care of all the time, you need time for yourself. And I think that's what really kept my positive attitude, just knowing that, when I come home, I'll take care of Trey and I'll be able to do that. But for now, I need to see what's on my mind and be able to breathe and think through it and talk about other things with my girlfriends or with my family, because there is a life post-cancer, there's a life during it, and the world continues to go on. So yes, you're focusing all your energy, and as you should, on who you're taking care of, but also give time for yourself. And that's what I think is arguably one of the most also important pieces about this whole journey that we're all going on. So for me, it was walking and cooking and trying to go grocery shopping and different things. But for you, it might be, taking a long bath or calling your girlfriends or whoever it may be. And that's, I think, what makes it better, because you'll realize there is a life outside and you also want to keep that going. And I think as a caregiver, you deserve some time to, not even be selfish, but take care of yourself.
Mm-hmm. And those two are different things. I'm glad you pointed that out. Yeah. And it just makes me wonder, if your commitment to having a positive mindset is somehow related to choosing self-care, or, maybe choosing self-care has somehow led to that positive mindset. So it just makes me, curious about whether or not there's a relationship there, and that if you influence one, maybe the other one would be impacted as well.
I think so. And I kind of have actually a few questions for you, Danielle, and I'm happy that you're here. And I really wish you were my asset a few months ago. So I know people are going to really enjoy this, because it's difficult. And when you recently receive news that one of your loved ones does have cancer, what's that immediate response from you? What do you recommend them to do?
I kind of just want to say, ride the wave. There's going to be so many emotions, right, at the initial onset of a diagnosis. And in fact, what we know is that can be one of the most difficult times emotionally, typically between the time of being first diagnosed and starting treatment is one of the most difficult, because there's so many uncertainties. So there's not a lot of answers yet to a lot of really serious questions that have been put there by medical teams and results of biopsies and things like that. There are other really difficult parts of the cancer trajectory as well, in terms of like if your loved one was, if they experienced a recurrence, for example, or if they are going through a clinical trial, or if there's been significant changes to like financial health or employment. So no matter what that, landscape looks like for you, there's really no wrong way to feel, like, ever. It's any feeling you have is okay. It's fair game. It's normal. So some people feel like they're weak if they express their emotions. And unfortunately, what I've learned about emotions is that until you give them the space to express themselves, they usually just try harder to interrupt us. So if you can work on just experiencing the emotions, maybe that's journaling, maybe that's talking to a friend, maybe that's calling the helpline through the Alliance and talking with a patient navigator. Give your emotions space to breathe, be honest about them. Find those people that you can trust to just be real with, because you're going to go through all different types of emotions at different times. And also, with that said, I wish I had a nickel every time someone said, well, we have good days and bad days. And that's true before cancer, but it's certainly true after cancer too. And so when you have those good days, enjoy them, and don't feel bad if you enjoy them. Try to get back to some of those things that you guys used to do together that you really enjoyed, and seize that moment of when your loved one is feeling good and you're feeling good, and you have the time to do that, and choose to do that versus feeling guilty or selfish about it. And then when you have the bad days, because you will have the bad days, remind yourself that you've had good days before, and it's possible to have another good day. Things typically fluctuate. Also, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say, when people are undergoing significant stress, it can be tempting to slip back into destructive habits, like self-habits, like maybe picking up a cigarette or a beer if you've been trying really hard not to do that. And that's normal, right? Because the emotions can be so overwhelming that our bodies just want to do anything to stop the fear, the sadness, the worry, the anger. And, those chemicals are quite effective, but they're a short-term solution. And what I typically see is if there's a pattern of that self-destructive behavior, it just tends to make things worse. But doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It just might mean that it'd be helpful to talk to a professional who gets it, who can help you come up with a good plan to find ways that you can cope in a way that isn't going to lead to more problems in the future. So those would probably be my initial thoughts about, what do you do at the time of initial diagnosis as a caregiver?
I think what stood out to me from all that you just said, Danielle, is that there are so many emotions, and I could certainly relate to that. So when a caregiver, for example, does feel that maybe things are spiraling and they feel like everything is out of their control, what do you recommend? What should caregivers do?
So that's a really good question. And I think it depends on how long the person is feeling that way. I think there are always moments in the days and maybe hours or so where it feels really overwhelming. And you might be able to pick up on the pattern of when you notice that kind of panic rise up in you. Is it at nighttime, for example? A lot of people struggle right before bed. Things kind of quiet down. Their brains just start cycling and you can't get it to stop. Or maybe you notice that tends to happen an hour before an appointment, for example, like when you have to take your loved one to the doctor. So sometimes it's helpful to kind of monitor when those moments are happening, because for the most part, they may not you may not feel that way the whole day. If someone is feeling completely out of control all day long, crying all day, not able to function at work, not able to function, at home. If that lasts for an extended period of time where it gets concerning, I'd certainly say talk to the doctor. Typically, medical teams who are addressing the needs of someone with cancer are good at asking the caregiver how they're doing. So use the opportunity to speak up for yourself if things really aren't going well. Now, in those moments, though, those like smaller sections of feeling out of control in the day, which tend to happen again to all of us, but especially when you're going through something really stressful, I encourage people to think about, okay, is the worry attached to something that I can control or not? And typically the worry is attached to something you really have no control over. And if that's the case, it's kind of self-defeating, and it can really ruin your well-being for a very long time, or just feel like you can't get back out of that. So since research is telling us that self-care is important and it impacts ourselves as well as our loved ones, I think we should take this topic really seriously. This is a really great segue into something that I wanted to bring up during this breakout session, which is thought distortions. Mm-hmm. So out of the things that caregivers have control over, and you might want to disagree with me at first, is their thoughts. So, we may not be able to control those automatic thoughts that pop into our heads, and they happen all the time. But we do have control over how much time and space we give them to take root in our minds. So what I'd like us to do together is talk a little bit about what some of those thought distortions are, what they tend to look like, as a caregiver. And so what I'll do is kind of just give you a general definition of the thought distortion. I'll give you an example that I've heard along the way that caregivers tend to say. And then Sarah, you're going to help by reframing that thought distortion in a way that is more geared toward how that caregiver actually does have control in the moment. Are you game?
I love this.
Okay, awesome. So one of the first ones is called emotional reasoning. And that is really when we let our emotions, which are different than our thoughts, decide how we think and believe what's going to happen in the future. And typically our emotions don't usually do a good job of predicting what's going to happen. But in that moment, we might assume that emotion, especially the negative emotions that we have, reflect our reality. So an example that a caregiver might say in their head is, I feel so hopeless. There's no way that this situation can get better. I just know it. It's just completely hopeless. So Sarah, how could a caregiver reframe that?
So first off, I love this exercise. And I think a good way to reframe that for your mental health and a lot of other things along the way is to think, sometimes I feel really hopeless. But when that happens, what I like to do personally, take a step back in my mind and just focus what I love, focus on what I'm grateful for.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not trying to change the fact that you feel helpless. Yes, you feel helpless. Again, any emotion is fair game. Experience it. Let it be real for you. But we don't have to take it to that next step of deciding how we think about something or how we perceive our reality. Another one is overgeneralization, which is viewing one negative event as representing a pervasive pattern of defeat. Again, it's kind of connected to that emotional reasoning. I think I'm guilty of this one for sure in my own life. So an example of overgeneralization would be, the doctor we saw today was just awful. He was not helpful at all. And so, I just know it. There's no one who can help my husband.
So
what do you think?
I'm going to rephrase this. And this is a good example because I think overgeneralization obviously is huge in this atmosphere we're all in. So a way to rephrase that and reframe it would be, we had a really tough day at the doctor's office. We just need to take some time to sort out what we need and move on to accepting what was said in what areas, and then maybe want a second opinion.
Exactly. So it's reminding yourself, oh, wait a second. Even though we had an experience we didn't necessarily enjoy, we can take control and move toward our goal, which may include getting a second opinion. Where is it that we can take some control back? Awesome. Okay. Another one is the mental filter, which is singling out and finding that little detail in a situation and just dwelling on it to the point that you can't see through it at all. That's like your only filter. It's almost like putting on those glasses and now your whole world is impacted by that one little negative detail that's happened. So here's a good example. My sister said I complain too much about caring for dad. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut then because I don't want to talk about it, because if I say one word, they're just going to say I'm a complainer.
Okay. So let's fix this. I think a better way to look at it would be, my sister said I complain too much about caring for my dad, but sometimes, we need a place to vent because caregiving is hard for me. So it's also important that I have a safe place to talk about my feelings. So I'm going to find someone else to be honest with about these feelings. So you don't have to filter it or ignore it all the way.
Yes. And, this is a conversation for a whole other topic, but sometimes our support systems shift and change after a cancer diagnosis. People often find that some of the people they thought they'd have around them aren't showing up. And then people that you may not have assumed would be able to come alongside you end up doing that. So instead of really focusing on those people who may not be as supportive as you want them to be, you don't deny the fact that you still need social support, and good social support where you can be honest and talk about the realities of what you're facing. Okay, one more, should statements. So trying to motivate yourself by just focusing on what you think you should do, what you shouldn't do. These could be things that you think someone has often, is telling you, but a lot of times no one's ever directly told you. It's just this feeling that you have for whatever reason. And typically with these should statements, they often lend itself to a lot of guilt. So if you're someone who feels guilty a lot, I encourage you to think, okay, where do I get stuck on should statements? So an example would be, I should stay up all night and get dad's finances together because I know that if I don't, I'm just going to fail as a caregiver.
So I think a better way to attack and look at these should statements, first of all, no guilt allowed here. It'd be organizing dad's finances are important to me, but so is sleep. So I need to break this down into small sections and steps and ask for help.
Awesome. I lied. I do have one more. Do you have time for one more, Sarah?
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. The last one is personalization, which is seeing yourself as the cause of a negative external event for which you actually weren't responsible for. And I know we can't skip this one because so many caregivers take things personally and feel like when their loved one is going through something really difficult, that all the negative things that happen around them is somehow related to that caregiver's behavior or what they've done, which that's typically not the case. Mm-hmm. So an example of this would be, well, if Sam is in a bad mood today, it must be because of something I did wrong.
When really, it's probably not to do with you. So it's no fun when Sam is in a bad mood. I'm going to take breaks from him that I can separate his mood from my own.
That's awesome. Thank you. You did an awesome job, Sarah. And I hope that, maybe these really resonated for you, but if not, I do encourage you to just look up thought distortions, or they're sometimes called cognitive distortions for caregivers, because there's a lot of information on this. And actually there's some good exercises that you can do out there if you want to dig into this a little bit more. And we actually are going to end with a little bit of an exercise for you before we get to our question and answer section. So what I'm going to do now is get some slides set up for us so we can talk through a couple positive affirmations after looking at really common negative self-talk examples for caregivers. All right, so here is a slide that I have of examples of negative self-talk that through my experience as an oncology social worker, I've heard caregivers say from time to time. And somewhat connected to those thought distortions, these negative self-talk examples are really the foundation that often lend itself to believing in these false realities that we kind of create in our mind. So I'm hoping that you're kind of taking a look at them now and reading a few of them to yourself. I'm reading a couple myself now too. And I think some common ones is if I ask for help, I'm weak. I'm responsible for everything that my loved one needs, or it's selfish of me to think of myself at a time like this. So, Sarah, when you look at these examples of negative self-talk, are there one or two that tend to be really tempting for you?
Yeah, Danielle, this kind of brings back, for better or for worse, some of my thoughts during Trey's time with chemotherapy. And the main one that sticks out to me is it's selfish of me to think of my needs at a time like this. And that's something I know I've touched on a lot during our presentation today about taking time for myself. And that's what really kept me mentally sane and positive, I would make the argument. And at first it was tough for me to get to that place because I did feel bad going for walks. I thought, oh my gosh, what if he wakes up from a nap and then he needs me, he doesn't feel good, and anti-nausea medicine. And I was so frantic, I didn't take time for myself. And I realized it was affecting me. And it's not selfish for you to think of your needs. And I know we could talk about that differently, but that's one that stuck because I felt bad running out and running errands when you should not at all.
Yeah, I don't know. There's something about just looking at all of these and my body just feels kind of heavy, right? My mind just feels stuck. And you can kind of see how these thoughts impact our emotions, and our emotions often impact what we do and the choices that we make. So they might seem small, but in my experience, these things are really, really powerful. So for our viewers, take a moment and maybe think about the ones that are really tempting for you and challenge yourself to reframe them. And we can reframe them by replacing them with positive self-talk. I'm even just smiling looking at some of these because the reality is nothing has changed with your loved one in terms of the reality of the cancer diagnosis or the side effects or the loss that you may have faced. We're not asking you that these things are going to magically change your outcomes, but there is a sense of just feeling a little lighter. You can choose and maybe see gratitude more easily or see the little things more easily, the joy that still exists. Like Sarah was talking about earlier, life is still going on. And when we're willing to take control of our thoughts and reframe them positively, they can really have an impact, even if nothing with the cancer experience has actually changed. So some of my favorites are, things can actually get better. Again, that doesn't necessarily change what's going on, but just believing that it can be better can be really powerful. Or I deserve time for myself, and that I can take responsibility for knowing my limits and advocating for myself. Do you have any of these that you really like?
Yes, I love all of these because I mentioned I'm so positive and I try to be, but a few right off the bat that I love is I can overcome the challenges that come my way, because I think we all can. Taking challenges and head on and really understanding what's ahead of you, but knowing that you can do it is huge throughout this entire process. And another one is I am capable and resilient, because we are. You are an amazing person and you are doing the absolute best you can. And that constant reminder and that knowing of your self-worth and then what you can do is massive. And I know everyone watching this is probably thinking, the long road ahead or what's going to happen, this and that. Positive self-talk. This right here is my favorite slide of this whole presentation, Danielle.
Thank you. So we have a challenge for you. You don't have to completely believe this self-talk. There's certainly days that I don't believe most of these, but that doesn't keep me from saying them to myself. And so our challenge for you is to pick one of these that you really like, that kind of feel like fit you and the situation that you're going through, and write it down with like a real piece of paper and a pen. Write it down and say it to yourself at least 3 times a day. It may feel silly at first, and that's okay. But this is one of the first steps that you can take to controlling your thoughts and making less room for some of those destructive thoughts that end up really causing us stress. So take some time, decide which one that really fits you, and say it to yourself at least 3 times a day. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. We have had an excellent time with you. The next part of this is going to be getting a chance to answer questions that you have.
Nation of Allies. Thank you so much for joining us for this caregiver breakout session. I was basically over here smiling the whole time while watching the chat and seeing you guys connect with each other and talk about caregiving and what similarities and differences that you've all faced together. This is just what makes this community quite magical. So again, thank you for joining Sarah and I. It has been quite an honor to get to know Sarah and do this with her, because she is, as you have watched, a tremendous rock star already in such a short period of time. And she's really dedicated herself to this topic and to raising awareness for colorectal cancer. So, hi, Sarah.
Thank you, obviously.
Okay, so we have, oh, sorry.
I was just saying thanks for having me, and I've really enjoyed this session. I look forward to getting to some questions here.
Awesome. So it looks like the first question is, how do I balance staying connected to the colorectal community and being an ally without the news of deaths and reoccurrences affecting my mental health? So Sarah, do you want to start with your experience with that, and then I can follow up with some thoughts?
Sure. I think naturally cancer is sad, right? There's no way you get that news about anyone having it and don't become upset, right? I remember the Chadwick Boseman passing was really shocking for a lot of people. That hit obviously the entire world, and especially Trey and I, because he was someone, Chadwick Boseman, that we didn't know had it. And this is people like, I don't necessarily know you guys face to face right now, but I feel like I know you. And if I found out someone passed or was dealing with stage 4 or whatever it is, it would be absolutely heartbreaking. But I do think the alliance and having everyone together makes it such a powerful, almost family-like mentality. And for me, I think, I'm sorry, my dog is barking. For me, I think what's so important is that we have each other, and that when you accept the news and kind of lean on one another, for me, that's what's really helped. Like even talking to you, Danielle, over the past few weeks has been huge. I'm going to, hold on, get my dog.
While Sarah does that, I think she said 2 key points that she could have basically read what I had in my notes about that. And the first one is, I don't think that there's really a way to not allow death and recurrence to affect your mental health. I think that's normal. And I think you don't want anyone to get to a place where they're callous to those things that are realities about this disease. But you do have control over balancing your exposure to them. And I would recommend that, because what we know is, when something hits you personally, when you have dealt with something personally, it does have the power to impact you at a deeper level than maybe another thing that you're passionate about, but maybe you haven't experienced personally. So there has been some suggestions out there that you balance your volunteering and your caregiving to things outside of something that was a direct personal experience that you've had. So maybe it's volunteering at an animal shelter, for example, or being a big brother or being a big sister. So balance your giving back to the big community with other opportunities than just colorectal cancer. The other thing too is that your needs and your ability, your desire to be a part of the larger colorectal community will change over time. So don't feel like you have to decide what you're going to do in 5 years. Take an account of how you're feeling now and allow yourself to take care of yourself for this moment. Because during different seasons of your life, you'll find that you'll want to be a part of the community more, or you might need to step back more. And that's totally okay. Your community will be there for you. And Sarah also said that she's just found it so helpful to talk to other people who get it. And my guess is that if you brought this question to some people that have also been in this community for a while, they will also have the same question that you're posing right now and might want to give you some of their own tips or advice, or at least just say, yeah, I get it. Sometimes it's really hard to be a part of this community and being reminded of some of the realities. Sarah, is there anything else you want to add to that question?
I think I'm all set, other than the fact that just kind of reiterating what you said, that the support, and I would call this kind of like a family. I know I said that before. It is really huge, because I think just having other people that are familiar with every situation you're probably going through was really the most helpful for me. And I told you a few weeks ago, Danielle, I wish I knew you a few months back, but even now I can't even tell you how helpful what you've said over the last few weeks has meant to myself and Trey.
Oh, that's really cool. I'm glad we were able to connect.
Me too.
Exciting. Okay, so the next question is about scanxiety, which I'm so glad someone asked, because typically it's the person with cancer who's often like, how do I deal with this? This is like completely rocking my world and I feel so out of control. But that's often a very similar feeling for caregivers as well. And so I guess a question I have for you, and I think if I recall, Sarah, you're within the first year of Trey's diagnosis. So have you experienced scanxiety yet?
Yeah, we actually have. So take out the first, few scans, and we found out the cancer diagnosis. But after he finished treatment, we were in Baltimore, and it was his first scan since finishing chemo, which I know a lot of people have dealt with. And I'm really sorry, my dog never cries, and she's hearing this and she's becoming really emotional. So this is real life right here too. The good news is Trey's working out, so I'm here alone, so she's just going crazy. But anxiety was real, and Trey's not someone to get overly stressed, nor am I. But that was something that hit us really hard, because it was right after he finished chemotherapy. We were doing the scans that week because we weren't living in Baltimore. We were moving out a few weeks after treatment, so we got them right when he finished. And the night leading up to his scans after chemo, neither of us slept, because the what ifs in our head was so real. So for me and Tim, that was extremely, extremely difficult. And I don't know what could have maybe prepped me for that. And I'm really excited to listen to what you have to say, because that was really tough. And we go again next month, and I am dreading it again.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and that was one of the points I wanted to make is scanxiety is lasting. So for those of you who have survived this disease for quite a long time, you know this to be true, that it might get a little easier as the space between treatment and your scans increases, but that doesn't mean scanxiety ever goes back to zero. It is something that we need to prepare for. It is something that we need to expect. And because we expect it to happen, and we know, pay attention to the pattern. How soon before the scan am I starting to notice this like anxiety in myself? It could be physical symptoms. It could be yelling at the kids. It could be, whatever scanxiety kind of manifests, however it manifests in you, pay attention to when that starts. For some people, it could be several weeks. For some people, it's a couple days. Just know it about yourself, because then you can prepare. If you live with the person that you care for, talk about the fact that we're getting close to a scan? How do we want to manage that? How can we carve out some really fun things that can distract us from the fact that a scan is coming up? Do we want to set some ground rules that within the 3 days, before the scan, that we are not going to talk about X, Y, or Z, or we're going to carve out 10 minutes to just talk about all the things that we're completely scared about, and then we're going to say no more until we hear the results. I think that there's some creative and fun ways that you can think about taking control back from that anxiety that tends to creep in. And it connects really well to what we talked about today during our session. Whether or not you worry about the results of the scan doesn't change the outcome of the scan. So your thoughts don't have the power to change what the outcome is of the scan. So although you have that automatic thought of being worried and being anxious, I just encourage people to balance it with the thought that maybe it'll be okay, and maybe the outcome will be what you and your loved one wants. So if you think about how much time your brain is allowed and how much you're allowing your brain to think about the things that you're worried about, at least ask your brain to think about and visualize and meditate on the possibility that the good thing happens. It doesn't necessarily change the outcome, but you do have control of how much space you give those really scary feelings that really aren't based in reality, but just based in our anxiety.
Thanks, Danielle. Yeah, I'm going to have to use that, no joke, moving forward in like 3.5 weeks. So it's probably good that we had this discussion today, just because that's helpful, and I really like the idea of kind of thinking through in terms of, let's get all our fears out right now, 10 minutes go, and we'll move forward and be in a better mental headspace there.
Yeah. And I recommend Blue Hope Nation as well. I think that the topic of scanxiety comes up quite frequently. So, you'd be in good company if you jumped on Blue Hope Nation and kind of looked up old posts or posted about scanxiety again, and just kind of see what people do, what's been successful for them. Sometimes just saying that you're feeling that way can relieve some pressure off the bat. It's a great question. Okay, so there's a question about how do you get to love the new you, the one after diagnosis? And I'm not sure if this is specifically directed to the patient, but we're going to flip it a little bit to like, how do you learn to love yourself or love your loved one after the changes that cancer brings? So Sarah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think for myself, I know we've talked a lot about self-care and mental health, and I think self-love would fall in this as well. So the first part I'll dive into is really loving yourself during this. I know we talked about having frustrations, especially for me, right? I said it 100 times, but I've never dealt with anything like this, illness or medical background, no one in my family, nothing like this. So for me, I think the self-love was being patient with the learning curve in terms of, learning how to flush a port and learning how to be patient with showers and learning how to, like, all of that is so real. So for me, it was more trying to just be proud of myself, taking on a whole new role of a caregiver. So loving myself in terms of accepting when I was frustrated and trying to be patient and being positive. And that, like I consistently say, was crucial for me feeling good about myself and being the best version for Trey. And I think loving Trey with the diagnosis, right? And it's not that I ever fell out of love with him, but certainly a relationship changes. And I know, you can have a child with it or a husband with it or a significant other with it or a parent. You still love whoever you're with, but obviously that relationship takes on a whole new level. And that's something that I've been fairly open about. I know discussing with you, Danielle, just in terms of, for me, it's my significant other and loving him the same way, even when he's, laying down really sick and doesn't want to eat and cranky and mad, right? Like that's something we never dealt with, and we were lucky to never have dealt with it. But now my main goal, and I think, I hope a lot of you guys agree, is that loving your significant other in a different way even is just as important. Maybe not as, your partner, but as someone that you deeply care for on a different level. So I think self-love and learning a different type of love were huge and are really important.
That was really well said, Sarah. This is a deep topic, and so I feel like we're just going to kind of skim the surface on this, and I encourage whoever asked this question to think about reaching out like a patient navigator through the Colorectal Cancer Alliance, because this is a big deal. And I think there's so many things that you said, Sarah, that are really important. First, it starts with self-love. And I think that as caregivers, you're especially tasked with figuring out how to not lose yourself through this process. And it's really hard to continue to have motivation to love and care for others when we're struggling to do it for ourselves. So I thought that was a really great point. The other thing too that we know about relationships and we know about people is that they always grow and change. So the thing that caused growth and change in your life has been cancer, but in other people's lives, it could have been the death of a loved one, or it could have been a traumatic car accident, or it could have been moving. There's all these things in life that happen that create major changes in relationships. So that's a given in life. And so you've actually had some experience, if you've grown to this place in your life now, that you've learned to love someone through changes as you've changed and as how your loved one changes. And even though the things that cancer often brings includes loss and could significantly impact a relationship, remember that you do have experience of loving someone through change, because that's just normal humanity and human relationships. So think back to those times in your life that you had to accept someone or learn a new way to communicate with someone after a change. And can you use those same skills and experiences to this experience? And this is also where marriage and family therapists, clinical social workers are really good at helping people navigate some of this stuff, because it gets messy and it's often connected to our own backgrounds. And it's just a really good time to say, this isn't, I'm just really struggling to learn to accept myself and learn to accept my loved one. You start with just being honest with that and being willing to seek out some support. You might be really surprised that you can actually move forward with your loved one. Okay, we have a few more minutes left, and let's see here. Oh, someone has said, Sarah, give Olympia a good scratch for me. I like that.
Well, I sure will. She's obviously being a crazy girl during this presentation. She hears you guys, and a dog helped during this. I will say she was a puppy, but she was really good. She'd always know who was stressed or not feeling good, and she'd lay down with us.
Yes, that's awesome. But a really good question here too. What can we do as a patient? What can we do to help our caregivers? Have you heard anything from Trey about this?
I haven't, but I definitely have a few thoughts on it. And I think the number one thing just right off the bat would be honesty, because I felt like Trey and I played a guessing game for a few weeks before we kind of figured this out, just in terms of, what was annoying to him, if I was offering food a lot or cooking food that was maybe not smelling great, or if he was feeling tired, but maybe he wanted to push himself to go for a walk with me and the dog. Like, those were things that I felt like weren't, it wasn't passive aggressiveness or anything like that, but the honesty conversation, because maybe he was afraid of admitting exactly how he was feeling because he wasn't exactly sure. And I think the honesty would change some of those situations, right? Like, hey, Sarah, I'm really not hungry. I don't want this. I don't feel like going for a walk, rather than trying to push yourself to make your caregiver feel better. Because I think it's not, there's no hostility. Of course, you love whoever you're taking care of, and you love your caregiver, but it's just, I think, opening the conversation just in terms of being real with each other would help. So I think as a patient, if you just told your caregiver, like, I feel like crap, I don't want to do anything, and you don't do anything, right? Rather than me consistently, or the caregiver consistently asking, do you want this? Do you want this? Just be like, I'm good. Shut the door. I want to watch TV. I don't feel good, whatever. Like, that kind of thing, I think would be really helpful from a caregiver's point of view, just really being truly honest.
I love that. And connected to that is, don't expect your caregiver to be a mind reader. So they can't read your mind, believe it or not. I know they try really hard sometimes, but really like Sarah's saying, being honest, speak up and say what you need and what you don't need, because caregivers often feel like they're floundering trying to guess at what's happening. So, I don't think I could have said it better, Sarah, but communicating your needs and encouraging your caregiver to take care of themselves, and making sure you're not sending a mixed message that it's not okay for them to take care of themselves. Make sure it's a blatant, yes, do this for yourself. I think could go a long way. So sadly, our time is up. We have had a blast. I know I can speak for you, Sarah, right, and say that we've had an excellent time. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we are honored to be a part of this session and wish you all the best. Take care.
Thank you, guys.